Yourself, Dr. Shea.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Shea McLean. I am an ecologist, an evolutionary geneticist, as well as sociologist, and the creator of Decolonize All the Things. So a lot of stuff that I do is predominantly surrounding studying human health, because I'm also a biological anthropologist and sociologist.
Fabulous. So today we're going to be talking about chapter number 5, Get Smarter About Race and Racism. And this wouldn't have been able to be written without Dr. Shea and your own dissertation, which will you please talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so my dissertation was titled Du Bois Meets Darwin, and it's pretty much a project that looks at trying to get into a better job and sense of language surrounding how do we talk about race and racism and human health without reproducing racialized distinction in racial ideologies.
Yeah, so basically what that looks at is how do we make sure that we're looking at things in an anti-racist lens without doing racism? Because so much of race and racialization has to do with medicine and biology and science. So how do we undo that and come forward with a better understanding? So I will do a little bit of a reading here. It's on page 95 if you're following along. As a Black person, I have often been asked, why do you have to bring race into this? This question usually makes me laugh because I deal with frustration through humor. But it also makes me reflect on the reality that race is a massive part of my life as a Black person in the United States. I do not bring race into things. I was brought in to race. Human beings have existed for 200,000 years, but race has only existed for about 600 years. Race is not a biological fact, or even something that humans discovered and then exploited to oppress others. Race was invented and implemented specifically for the purposes of oppression. In this chapter, we will learn about the invention and implementation of race and the ensuing consequences. And then I'll just read you a little bit more from the intro. Political and race theorist Dr. Utz McKnight explains that race is not what describes human difference, but what humans use to create the possibility of difference. Racism uses race to create difference and then assigns meaning to and ranks humans as superior or inferior based on those differences. As explained by Dr. Dorothy Roberts, acclaimed scholar of race, gender, and the law, race is not a biological category that is politically charged. It is a political category that has been disguised as a biological one. Race is not a fact of biology or genetics, but because of its impact on all elements of society, it's a very real aspect of life that we must examine and get smarter about. Race and racism permeate every corner of society that has been touched by European colonization. In this chapter, we will explore how it is internalized by us, intrapersonal racism, affects our interactions, interpersonal racism, and impacts the larger infrastructures that control society, institutional racism. In the United States, for example, race and racism exist to serve and maintain white supremacy. As we get smarter about race and racism, we must be prepared to do lots of unlearning and relearning. So with that understanding and what Dr. Shea discusses, I want to look at so many different things. But first I want to talk about, kind of interview you. When people say race is a construct, I feel like it's inadequate because a lot of people don't understand things like, social construction or social reproduction theory. So when you talk about race, and I cite you here in the book, what do you think is the best way to start out? Or what are a lot of misconceptions that people need to get smarter about?
One of the things that I think makes that difficult about, like you said, people saying race is a social construction, but we don't really understand what social construction means in a lot of senses. I think the best way to generally start a conversation with people who are trying to learn more and get smarter about the topic is that race is a child of racism. That way we can understand that there is a particular historical relation between the two, and more importantly, a specific form of a functional relation between them as a larger system.
Definitely, and we have to understand it in terms of systems. Let's talk about this in the section on race. Another way of saying that race is a human invention is to say that it is a social construct. Social constructions are the ways humans organize society to support their assumptions about humanity. In terms of race, these assumptions include two key elements described by historian and anthropologist Patrick Wolfe. One, difference is not neutral, to vary is to be defective, and two, race links physical characteristics to cognitive, cultural, and moral ones. These assumptions are not based on evidence or reality. Instead, the ways we define reality have been constructed to reinforce racist lies. How humans perpetuate, maintain, and recreate social constructs over time is called social reproduction. And so these things are super essential to understand. But the problem is that we can see all different aspects of society and industry and different fields, not just academia, but the ways we communicate with one another, that are influenced negatively by racialization. Things like over-policing in Black communities, things like gentrification, segregation. There are so many different ways this shows up. But I also cited here the association, the American Association of Physical Anthropologists, and Dr. Shea actually worked on that memo. The quote that I have here is, "Race does not provide an accurate representation of human biological variation." Will you break that down for us?
Yes. So a lot of times when we have conversations about biological variation, it's commonly also referred to as diversity. But please make sure you note this is not to be conflated with our usual understanding of racial diversity or other forms of socio-political diversity. So with regards to race not in any way being an accurate reflection of human biological variation, there are so many, for example, gene variants that exist within the human species. And they exist across all kinds of different populations because the populations are ones that we create and come up with. They're boundaries that we utilize in order to help us have a better understanding in a statistical sense about what genetic variants exist within the human species. But most importantly, the categories that we know of today as race have absolutely nothing to do with human genetic variation in the sense that they in any way reflect or mirror the biological variation that exists there. None of those categories that we have for race and racialization can tell us anything about human evolution. But human evolution can tell us a lot about a lot of the political shifts that we've seen through human history, and even tell us about some of the consequences of organizing our societies based on racial ideologies in a larger genetic and biological sense, because it does have a lot of consequences with regards to how it affects the lived and material world that we experience.
That's fascinating. And Dr. Shea's dissertation is going to be available for publish very soon. I'll make sure to link to it. I was able to sit in when the dissertation would be presented, and it was just so, eye and mind opening. But one of these things that I talk about when we say things like it's not an accurate representation of human biological variation is people will say, but Blair, white people have straight hair and Black people have curly hair. White people have narrow noses and Black people have wider noses. And then we'll even see things where people will say that that's because in Africa the air is more humid, so we had to have wider noses in order to breathe. That's unique to Black people. What do you say to folks like that?
The one thing that I definitely say to folks like that who make those kinds of comments first is that, well, where do you think humans came from? African continent. So if that was the case and we were relying solely on the temperature and the amount of humidity in the air on the African continent, we would then have to extend it to the entire species. So that means that in most cases, we are not going to be able to just make massive generalizations. One of the things that's a prime fact of evolutionary biology is variation itself. Without variation, a species does not exist. That's basically how you end up in a situation to where it goes extinct. Variation is a fact of life. And it's important for us to understand that a lot of the generalizations that we hear about entire groups of people or entire societies or even entire cultures are just that, generalizations. And we do understand in the sense that a generalization can very easily wipe out our understanding of all that is possible and all that has already occurred and is out there. So it's important for us to have a really critical eye when it comes to being careful about, oh, well, that's because of this, or that's because I know this, or these people are in this area, and then we can use that as a justification for why their biology looks a certain way. Biology is not in any sense of a way a useful metric for understanding human history and also understanding why humans behave in a certain way. We actually need as much as pretty much every single discipline that we have throughout human knowledge in order to understand life itself, because life doesn't occur in disciplines. We use disciplines in order to help us have different perspectives so we can utilize them to then have more accurate depictions and analyses of what's happening in human life.
Amazing. It's very true. We can't just separate humanity into different departments and fields. Science, anthropology, biology, all of these things are happening simultaneously. And history is definitely there too. And as a historian, I'm always happy to point that out for people. One of the things that I want to bring up too is in this timeline of the invention and implementation of race. And this is on page 100, right in the middle. I wanted to talk to you all about 1758 with Swedish botanist and scientific racist Carl Linnaeus, who classifies human beings into 6 variations with descriptions for skin color, body features, hair color, hair texture, eye color, behavior, form of government, and clothing. Form of government is it's kind of out of the ballpark, but okay, we're going to be ridiculous, the whole way, Carl Linnaeus. Now, even though Linnaeus does not use the term race, the descriptions he attaches to the variations he invented are deeply and objectively racist. These 6 variations include wild people, Homo sapiens ferus; red people, Homo sapiens americanus; white people, Homo sapiens europaeus; yellow people, Homo sapiens asiaticus; black people, Homo sapiens africanus; and monster people, Homo sapiens monstrossus. Now, the troubling thing when it comes to discussing race and racialization is that some of us still operate based on these flawed understandings, these harmful understandings. I've still seen medical textbooks that discuss humanity being split into 3 primary categories: Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. But these things are not accurate, and we see the consequences of them. There's a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit folks, and constantly they'll find Jane Does, people who may have been missing and murdered Indigenous women, and they'll categorize them as being European, as being white. So constantly, as people look through these different databases and they're looking for a missing white person, they're missing the fact that these people's bodies have been racialized incorrectly from what they actually are and how they understand themselves as Indigenous people and not as Europeans. And those people go missing. And even after they have passed from this life onto the next, we cannot find them because the racialization and this idea that there are 3 categories of people, it erases so many other people, and it's also fundamentally inaccurate. So will you talk to us about how we got to some of these assumptions other